Hey everybody, Nikki here with the Inside Story, and today we're reading Chapter 3 of A Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. So, Chapter 3. Alright, Chapter 3, The Complete Works of Laszlo Strange. Master Hirokin was immune to Laszlo's wonder. They're stories, boy. Stuff and fantasy. There was no elixir of immortality. If anything, it was just sugared blood. But look at the price, Laszlo insisted. Would they have paid that for sugared blood? What do we know of what kings will pay? That's proof of nothing but a rich man's gullibility. Laszlo's excitement began to wane. You're right, he admitted. The receipt proved that something called blood candy had been purchased, but nothing more than that. He wasn't ready to give up, though. It suggests at least that Siva tigers were real. He paused. Maybe. What if they were? Said Master Hirokin. We'll never know. He put a hand on Laszlo's shoulder. You are not a child anymore. Isn't it time to let this all go? He had no visible mouth, his smile discernibly only as a ripple where his dandelion fluff mustache overlapped his beard. You're plenty of work for a little enough pay. Why add more for none? No one's going to thank you for it. Our job is to find bugs. Leave it to the scholars to find answers. He meant well. Laszlo knew that. The old man was a creature of the library through and through. Its case system was, to him, the just rule of a perfect world. Within these walls, scholars were the aristocracy, and everyone else their servants, especially the librarians, whose directive weight was to support them in their important work. Scholars were graduates of the universities. Librarians were not. They might have the minds for it, but none had the gold. Their apprenticeship was their education, and depending on the librarian, it might surpass the scholar's own. But a butler might surpass his master in genitality, and remain, nevertheless, the butler. So it was for librarians. They weren't forbidden to study, so as long as it didn't interfere with their duties. But it was understood that it was for their personal enlightenment alone, and made no contribution to the world's body of knowledge. Why let scholars have all the fun? Laszlo asked. Besides, no one studies weep. That's because it's a dead subject, Master Hirokin said. Scholars occupy their minds with important matters. He placed a great emphasis on important. And just then, as if to illustrate his point, the door swung open and a scholar strode in. The pavilion of thought had been a ballroom. Its doors were twice the height of normal doors, and more than twice the width. Most scholars who came and went found it adequate to open one of them, then quietly close it behind himself. But not this man. He laid a hand to each massive door and thrust, and by the time they hit the walls and shuddered, he was well through them, boot heels ringing on the marble floor, his long, sure stride unhindered by the swish of robes. He disdained full regula, except on ceremonial occasions, and dressed instead in impeccable coats and breeches, with tall black riding boots and a dueling blade at his side. His only nod to scholar scarlet was his cravat, which was always of that color. He was no ordinary scholar, this man, but the apotheosis of scholars, the most famous personage in Zosma, save the queen and the hierarch, and the most popular bar none. He was young and glorious and golden. He was Thyron Nero, the alchemist, second son of the Duke of Val and godson to the queen. Heads lifted at the jarring of the doors, but unlike the irritation mirrored on all faces when Master Hirokin had laughed, this time they registered surprise before shifting into adulation or envy. Master Hirokin's reaction was pure adulation. He lit up like a glaive at the sight of the alchemist. Once upon a time, Laszlo would have done the same. Not anymore, though. No one was looking at him to notice the way he froze like a prey creature, and seemed to shrink at the approach of the golden godson, whose purposeful stride carried him straight to the inquiry's desk. This visit was out of the ordinary. Thyron Nero had assistants to perform such tasks for him. My lord, said Master Hirokin, straightening as much as his old back would allow, it's so good of you to visit us, but you needn't trouble yourself to come in person. We know you're more important things to attend to than running errands. The librarian shot Laszlo a sideward glance. Here, in case Laszlo might miss his meaning, was the best possible example of a scholar occupying his mind with important matters. And with what important matters did Thyron Nero occupy his mind? With no less than the animated principle of the universe, Azoth, the secret essence alchemists had sought for centuries. He had distilled it at the age of 16, enabling him to work miracles, among them the highest aspiration of ancient art, the transmutation of lead into gold. "That's good of you, Hyrroken," said this paragon, who had the face of a god, in addition to the mind of one. "But I thought I'd better come myself." He held up a rolled request form, so that there could be no question whether this was a mistake. "A mistake? There was no need, my lord," Master Hyrroken assured him. "There could be no quibbling with a request of yours, no matter who delivered it. We're here to serve, not to question." "I am glad to hear that," said Nero, with the smile that had been known to render parlors full of ladies mute and dazed. And then he looked at Laszlo. It was so unexpected. It was like sudden immersion in ice water. Laszlo hadn't moved since the doors burst open. This was what he did when Nero was near. He seized up and felt as invisible as alchemists pretended he was. He was accustomed to cutting silence and a cool gaze that slid past him as though he didn't exist. So the look came as a shock, and his words when he spoke an even greater one. "And you, strange, are you here to serve or to question?" He was cordial, but his blue eyes held a brightness that filled Laszlo with dread. "To serve, my lord," he answered, his voice as brittle as the papers in his hand. "Good." Nero held his gaze, and Laszlo had to battle the urge to look away. They stared at each other, the alchemist and the librarian. They held a secret between them, and it burned like alchemical fire. Even old Master Hyrroken felt it, and glanced uneasily between the two young men. Nero looked like a prince from some saga told by firelight, all luster and gleam. Laszlo's skin hadn't been gray since he was a baby, but his librarian's robes were, and his eyes too, as though that color were his fate. He was quiet, and had a shadow's talent for passing unremarked, while Thyron drew all eyes like a flare. Everything about him was as crisp and elegant as freshly pressed silk. He was shaved by a manservant with a blade sharpened daily, and his tailor's bill could have fed a village. By contrast, Laszlo was all rough edges. Burlap to Nero's silk, his robe had not been new even when it came to him a year ago. Its hem was frayed from dragging up and down the rough stone steps of the stacks, and it was large, so the shape of him was quite lost within it. They were the same height, but Nero stood as though posing for a sculptor, while Laszlo's shoulders were curved in a posture of weariness. What did Nero want? Nero turned back to the old man. He held his head high, as though conscious of the perfection of his jawline, and when speaking to someone shorter than himself, lowered only his eyes, not his head. He handed over the request form. Master Hyrroken unrolled the paper, adjusted his spectacles, and read it, and then readjusted his spectacles and read it again. He looked up at Nero, and then he looked at Laszlo, and Laszlo knew. He knew what the request was for. A numbness spread through him. He felt as though his blood and spirit had both ceased to circulate, and the breath in his lungs too. "Have them delivered to my palace," Nero said. Master Hyrroken opened his mouth and confined it, but no sound came out. He glanced at Laszlo again, and the glazed light shone on his spectacles so that Laszlo couldn't see his eyes. "Do you need me to write out the address?" Nero asked. His affability was all sham. Everyone knew the riverfront palace of pale pink marble gifted him by the queen. And he knew they knew. The address was hardly the issue. "My lord, of course not," said Master Hyrroken. "It's just, is there a problem?" asked Nero, his pleasant tone belied by the sharpness of his eyes. Yes, Laszlo thought, yes, there is a problem. But Master Hyrroken quailed under the look. "No, my lord, I'm sure it's an honor," and the words were a knife in Laszlo's back. "Excellent," said Nero. "That's that. Then I'll expect delivery this evening," and he left as he had come, boot heels ringing on the marble floor and all eyes following. Laszlo turned to Master Hyrroken. His heart hadn't stopped beating after all. They were fast and irregular, like a pair of trapped moths. "Tell me it isn't," he said. Still confounded, the old librarian was just held out the request form. Laszlo took it. He read it. His hands shook. It was what he thought. In Nero's bold, sweeping script was written the complete works of Laszlo Strange. Master Hyrroken asked in utter mystification, "What in the world could Thyron Nero want with your books?" That was chapter 3, guys. So I will see you tomorrow for chapter 4. See ya!